to 77977. Welcome to Empowered Church. We're glad you're here.
I'm really glad you're here. Speaking to nobody is not fun, and we've done that before. Would you bow your heads with me? Papa, we absolutely love you. God, we are privileged and honored and thrilled to be your people and to call you our God. God, you're amazing. You are amazing. So be with us this morning as we learn a little bit about praise and worship and begin to make our hearts after yours in that fashion. God, I speak that we would be open, we would be ready to receive and hear your words, and anything that is not from you, that we would toss it out. God, I thank you for your heart, for your passion for us, for your love, for your forgiveness, for your grace, and we are just so thankful that you're here and that you're with us. In Jesus' name. Okay, so I have been asked to talk about worship today, and it is one of the things that I'm very passionate about and love. I think I spend, 5 or 6 hours a week doing something in relation to worship, either worshiping myself, minimum 5 to 6 hours, planting my behind in that booth where Megan is right now, who I very much appreciate you being here and running this, or playing instruments and singing and just being a part of that. From when I was a little kid, I loved it because I love music. And I've always been involved in it somehow. My parents always had pianos and guitars and stuff, so we as boys would make ruckus noise all the time. And it's always been a part of me. And then I learned about David. David in the Bible is one of the kings that Jesus is called a second of. He came from the line of David, and David was a worshiper. And no matter what went on in his life, he worshiped. And it was amazing. It was nonstop. And so he is one of my heroes. I don't know is a good word because David did a lot of really dumb things too. But he's one of the guys that I look up to and try to model the good pieces of my life after. And so I'm going to tell a story, or kind of pieces of the story of David. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life, and then kind of see how that applies. So bear with me. I would like to take a little time out and just say, Jill, thank you. She had a vision for redoing this stage, and we're doing it in pieces, but she has been painting for the last several weeks, or the last couple weeks, all of this, and is making our stage updated and more beautiful, so thank you very much. Katie, thank you for jumping in on that as well. And learned something new about Jill that I didn't know. Heights are not her thing, so Katie graciously agreed to climb up on the scaffolding and paint that as the scaffolding wobbled back and forth, so appreciate that too, babe. Good job. It's so interesting to me how things phase in and out in our Christian history. Like praise and worship in the Old Testament, there were actually times and specific songs and stuff that we did all the way through probably about maybe 600 years ago. Festivals and feasts and all kinds of things. On this festival you sing these songs and you remembered about this, and on this time you sing these songs. Like we have those for Christmas today and kind of Easter, but I don't know how many of you are at home writing songs when anything exciting happens. I'm not, and I love worship. I mean, sometimes I'll sing to the Lord just my own stuff, but it's not like I'm writing songs like, man, God gave me a car, so I'm going to sing about Volkswagen, let's go, right? But in the Old Testament, and even parts of the New Testament, they would do that. And then throughout our church history, we would write songs in remembrance of what God would do. David lived this. So if we go way back and we look at David's life, he was the 8th son of Jesse. So slightly better than a shepherd. And if back then, shepherds were less than the sheep. So David was slightly better, but less than the sheep. Better than the shepherds, less than the sheep. Eighth son, if he comes home, great. If he doesn't, we'll make another one. He's just number 8 out there. Sometimes we remember his name. They start calling him numbers at that point, right? So Jesse has 8 sons, and his first 3, I don't know if this works like with dogs, but when you have a lot of puppies, there's usually the last few that come out are smaller and lesser and weak. It worked for Jesse that way too. His first 3 sons were like strapping and big guys, and then the next one was like really handsome, and then there was David, and he was short and ruddy. They said he was handsome, but he had really pretty eyes. Don't know if I would want to be known for that in the Bible. I'm the little one that had pretty eyes. Check me out. But that was David. So they sent David out to take care of the sheep. Let me emphasize, a little better than the shepherds, not as important as the sheep. So David's job was to keep all the other things away from Jesse's sheep so that they would prosper. Lions and bears, the sheep were more important than David. So David knew he had to fight the lions and the bears. Maybe he comes home, maybe he doesn't. We'll make another shepherd. It'll be fine. So he's out there protecting the sheep against lions. Like, you're not having the reaction that I had as I'm reading this. Like, I'm going to send, hey, Luke, buddy, I need you to protect the sheep at all costs. If you come home and there's no sheep, you're in trouble. If you don't come home and the sheep come home, that's great. Like, I can't imagine saying that to my kid. So if there's a lion or a bear that comes, your job is to protect the sheep, little buddy, who has cute eyes. They probably taste good to a lion and a sheep. I mean, a lion and a bear. So it was fascinating to me reading this, and God liked him. The 8th kid. If you remember a lot of the old stories, it was the firstborn that God sent the blessing to. And historically, the Jews, the whole culture, they would pass on all of the inheritance to the firstborn. And then what the firstborn didn't want went to the secondborn and the thirdborn, and then everybody after that didn't matter. So it was that firstborn. It was the Isaac. It was Abraham. It's interesting, but God liked David. And do you know why? Because David really liked God. It's almost like he knew that his father, Jesse, thought of him as normal, as the 8th son, some dude out in the wilderness that maybe comes home for dinner, hopefully. If they started without him, they started without him. Like, what I understood through the stories as I'm reading this is that David began to make God his father. And so David out in the wilderness would talk to God. Not weird. He would talk to God. And then he's a musician out there, and if you know anything about livestock, if you sing to them or you play music and stuff over them, they calm down. So David would play all the time. And he got really good at his instruments. And then he would sing to God, and he would worship God out in the wilderness with the sheep. And then he began to have this relationship with God. And then when the bear or the lion would come and he would fight him, all of that was like credited to God. God helped me fight the bear, little buddy. Fought the bear, killed the bear. Interesting. Like, David has this thing. He's talking about fighting the lions and the bears. And he goes, I would hit them with the rock. I would go up them and grab them by their whiskers and beat them until they died. That's in the Bible. I'm thinking I'm probably not grabbing the lion's mouth and hitting it. I'm going to keep slinging stones until that thing falls. Right? Keep my distance. No way. David goes right up to him, grabs his face, and starts, like he gets up and personal with his enemies. And he goes, God told me how to do that. God taught me. And then he sings about it. And he brings worship to God for that. So this is the dude who has made God his father and has gotten his strength and his wisdom and his confidence and the affirmation, that's the word I'm looking for, from God, not from his family, from God. Okay, so time out. Over here going on is Saul. Saul is the king of Israel and Judah, and he is doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. He doesn't obey God, and so God has removed his blessing from him. And then Samuel is our prophet of the day, and he was the one who God would talk to and then would go and speak that word. So God tells Samuel, Saul is no longer to be king, it's to be David, or it's to be a son of Jesse. And so Samuel goes over to Jesse's family, and he says, hey, bring me your sons. God told me one of them is to be king. So Jesse brings his first three. And Samuel looks at him, and he goes, whoa, that dude is awesome. He's good looking. He's huge. That's the first son. God says, no, it's not him. And then the second son, the third son. And then at this point, Samuel's going, do you have any other sons? And Jesse's like, well, no. Oh, yeah, there's this one guy, but he's a shepherd. He's number 8. He's way out in the wilderness. Well, go get him. For real? Did you see the first one? So Jesse sends somebody out to get him, and I don't know how much longer or later, David comes out, and then Samuel feels the heart and the passion of God for him, and that's messing me up. And he anoints David as king. David's a young man. He's like 15 or 16, fighting lions and bears, 15 or 16. Dude, I was intimidated in football, and I had pads on at 15 and 16, and I was hitting guys that were pretty big, but they're not lions and bears. David was a dude. So David comes, he gets anointed king at 15 or 16, and then goes back out to the sheep. I don't know, as Jesse, what you do with that. My son was anointed king. Saul is king. Love you, dude. Go watch the sheep now. The man of God, the prophet. Like in our day, pastors are respected a little bit, but in those days, the prophet spoke, everybody jumped. It was hardcore, and then for a prophet to come to your house, and then for a prophet to anoint somebody in your house as anything, that was a massive deal. But the 8th-born son was not a massive deal. And so he goes, okay, maybe God got it wrong. I don't know what the deal is, but it's weird. So go back out and take care of the sheep. A while later, now we're in Saul's camp, okay? So King Saul, the Lord has departed from him. He's no longer loving on and with Saul. He's now anointed and is on David. But Saul is still king. So Saul starts having all these spirits come after him, these evil spirits, and they would put him into kind of a depressed, crazed attitude. And so his servants are going, we really don't like this. The king is mad, and we're kind of taking it, so let's find a way to deal with this. And one of the ways that they would deal with it then is they would bring somebody in that could play music. And for some reason, that would calm people. So, long story, they find David, they bring David to King Saul, and he plays for him. Every time David played, the spirits would leave because David's worshiping. That evil spirit cannot be where a person is worshiping God from a real heart. Like, it has nothing to do with the song, but it has to do with the worship and the relationship that we all have with God. So whenever that presence, that demonic thing would come on Saul, David, come here and play that harp for him, or whatever it was, electric guitar, I don't know. So he would play, and the evil spirit would leave Saul. Saul would be calm, and then he'd be good for a few days. And then it would come back, and David would play. Crazy worship. So then David gets sent back to the sheep. Saul's fine. They go to war. The Philistines are coming against him. You probably all heard the story of David and Goliath. So David, out in the wilderness, his dad says, hey, our brothers your brothers are in war, so why don't you take a whole bunch of food out there and check on them, see how things are going. Kind of grease the wheels for promotion. So David brought, the Bible describes, cheese and dates and raisins and all this stuff. And he was supposed to give cheese. This is really irrelevant, but it was fascinating to me. He gave cheese to each of the commanders of his brothers' groups of men, right? Greasing the wheels. Hey, maybe they'll get promoted. Maybe they'll get recognized. And then David takes the food to his brothers, and he's going around. And then all of a sudden, Goliath is this huge man. So off of the ground, this is from my feet to my top of my hand. That's 8 feet tall. Goliath was almost 10 feet tall. So huge dude, probably about right here off the ground maybe. And he is just intimidating these Israeli soldiers. And he comes out and he's saying, if one of you come fight me, whoever wins, we don't have to have this big battle of army to army. He's just challenging them and he's mocking them and he's saying, your God is nothing, and you guys, who are the Israelites? Why are you out here? You're a bunch of dogs, blah, blah, blah. David hears this and he's going, he's just like, who are you talking about? That's my God. Why are you doing this? And his brothers get mad at him. Shut up, you little dog. You don't know anything. You're not a soldier. You can't do this. And they're all scared of Goliath, and they're mad at this little whippersnapper who's challenging them in their thought process. So David's talking around to the different the guys that he brought the cheese to, and they end up going back to King, and they say, hey, there's this kid. He'll fight him. What do you think? So they bring David to King Saul. King Saul kind of knows him. He goes, oh, yeah, you're that dude who are you? And so David says, I'm going to do this. Saul recognizes him, puts armor on him. David said, I can't do that. That's not how I was built. I have never held armor and swords. Anyways, David goes out to fight Goliath. And Goliath is challenging him, and he's going, you sent this little kid at me. He's got pretty eyes. This is weird. But I'll kill you and I'll feed your flesh too, blah, blah, blah. So David goes, but I come at you in the name of the Lord, knowing, and then he goes, and I grab the whiskers of the lions and the bear and I beat them to death, and I'm going to do the same to you, and I'm going to feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the fields and blah, blah, blah. So they fight. David takes his sling and he's whirling it around just like he did with the lion and the bear, and he lets it go. He clocks Goliath right between the eyes and knocks him out, goes over, takes his sword off, lops his head off, and wins the battle. All of Israel now is pumped, and they go and they attack the Philistines, and they just wreck them. It was awesome. David is then promoted, and he begins to worship his God. God is the one that brought that victory. All of you, don't look at me. This is God, and he praises his God in that victory. King Saul gives him his daughter. He's promoted. He has all this wealth and position. And then he's put over a bunch of these commanders he just brought cheese to the other day. And so little Davy is now in charge of half of the army, and he's going out to battle for Saul, and he is wrecking people. Just everywhere he goes, all of the people under him have huge success, to where they come back from one battle, and the typical was if you won, the families would come out in the streets and they'd sing and dance, and they're singing this song. Saul has killed 1,000 people and David 10,000 people. Normally you're celebrating the king and not the commanders, but David just had such favor and he had pretty eyes, so everybody's singing about him. And Saul hears this, and that evil spirit hits him again, and now he's thoroughly jealous of David. Who is this kid? Saul fought 1,000, and David got 10,000. All along, David is constantly giving all of the praise, all of the honor to his God, and not absorbing that. He stays humble, he stays low, and he's constantly promoted. Crazy. Little Davy is now over most of the army and has kings jealous of him. Bizarre. Anointed king at 15, now he's like maybe 20, over seasoned veterans and having more success than they are. So it goes on. David continues to have this success. Saul gets more and more jealous of him, and now he's got things talking to him. This kid is going to take over. He's going to kill you. He's going to all this bad stuff. And so they bring David in, and David plays for him, the very guy that Saul is really messed up over. And so Saul takes a spear and chucks it at David and just misses him. And then he takes another one and throws it. I'm like, David, on the first spear, it's probably time to scat. But he stuck around for a second spear. Saul missed him, and David runs out. And so David's going, there's probably something wrong here. And so Saul gets more and more jealous and more angry and frustrated at David. And David doesn't really know what's going on. Like, I'm just serving you. I'm doing whatever you ask of me. And eventually it gets so bad that David flees. He runs away from all that he's known, from Israel and Judea, and gets out into the country. And now Saul is coming after him. Like, he takes 3,000 men to go hunt down David. Crazy. David's out in the wilderness. Again, he knows this pretty well. Not managing sheep this time, but he starts gathering people that are out in the wilderness. And over time, he has 600 people that are out in the wilderness that just say, I'll follow you to death, man. You're amazing. I'll go anywhere you go. And he begins to develop this army out in the wilderness of people that just want to be with him. Constantly bringing praise, worshiping God, talking to them about God, and they'll go to the grave for him. Saul is hunting David. I can't believe this part made it in the Bible. But David is hiding in a cave. Saul and his 3,000 chosen men, these are like the elite, are trying to kill him, and they're following him, and they're chasing him. Saul has to go to the bathroom, goes into this cave, and is doing that. And David is in that cave, and he comes out, and he could kill Saul. All of his guys, all 600 of them say, kill him now. You've already been anointed king. We'll move into the palace. All 600 men are going, why are we living out here like this when we could be in the palace? Just go stick him with a knife, and we'll be done with it. David comes up, and he gets close, and then just this heaviness. God anointed this man. I can't touch him. So he cuts the hem of the garment off, and Saul leaves. David walks out and said, hey, God put you in my hand today, but I chose not to kill you. I can't lift my hand against the anointed. I'm not against you, so let's stop fighting. Saul says, okay, goes home. Evil spirits come back. They start messing with him, and then they go back out after David again. So David's living in the hill country, and he's got this group of people that he's kind of helping. They live in the hill country, and so somehow they form this bond. Well, they end up hearing that Saul is giving a reward for David, so they go and betray David. They tell Saul where he is. Saul brings his men back out, and they're hunting him. So David has now been betrayed by people he thought were close to him, and he starts worshiping again. He doesn't get mad at him and kill him and create this big problem. He just starts worshiping his God. God, you said you gave me these promises. You're taking me on a journey. I don't understand it. I'm not in the place you said I was going to be. You said I was going to be king. Now I'm being hunted. This is not what I had anticipated. So Saul and his men, they're camped down in this valley. David sees them, and the guys that had betrayed him are with them, showing them where to go. They fall asleep. And David takes one other dude, and they sneak into the camp. They take Saul's spear and water, and then they go out onto another hill, wake up in the morning. Hey, Saul, I was there. I could have killed you, but I chose not to, and please leave me alone. Saul says, yes, I'll leave you alone, and then goes back to his camp. Crazy, crazy, crazy. David could have killed Saul twice. Saul can't find him ever, and still he's just tormented. Saul is tormented with this demonic stuff, saying, you should kill David. He's going to try to take over, blah, blah, blah. It just fascinates me. So you move forward a little bit. Saul goes to war with the Philistines, and the Philistines end up killing Saul, King Saul, and his sons. And then David becomes king and has to battle within his own Israel and Judea, and they're fighting, and all through this, David is praising God. It is all about you. I'm doing what you called me to do. And each time that he has to make a decision, he goes before the Lord. God, what would you have me do? Do you want me to go up and attack, or do you want me to stay back? God, do you want me to move into this country or not? Every time, right back to the heart of God. I'm not going anywhere you're not going. I want to be in the middle of your will. So now David is actually king. The promise is fulfilled, and he just worships God. And then he becomes king of Israel and Judea, and then he's worshiping God. They fight everybody and their mother and just wreak havoc on the entire everywhere. And they're constantly victorious and bloodshed and all this stuff everywhere. And they finally get the Ark of the Covenant back from a group of people who have taken it. And David is dancing like a madman before God. The Ark of the Covenant is back, yeah. And they bring it to a certain place. One guy dies. David feels weird about that. not important, but they leave it at this guy's house. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant's at this guy's house. And he begins to have great success. David goes, we should probably have that in the palace. So they bring it actually to the palace. And so while they're bringing it in, then David erupts in dancing and praising and singing and instruments and takes his clothes off and is dancing before his God. And his wife is up in a room, and she sees him doing this. She goes, that's not how a king acts. Quit being undignified. And he goes, undignified? Who am I before God? There is no undignified. We're dust. We're nothing. Of course I'm going to be dancing and celebrating my God. I think it's comical that God put that in the Bible, that David took all of his clothes off and danced before him. But I also think that it's very, very, very deep. That however you want to worship, one of the greatest kings in all of Israel and throughout the Bible, who God is constantly referring back to as his friend, totally exposed himself before the Lord and said, there is nothing that I'm going to hold back from you. So on a Sunday morning today, we can say, yeah, I'm going to raise my hands. I'm not taking my clothes off. But whatever it is that you need to do before your God, there is no undignified. There is nothing. The only reason that you're feeling that it might be weird to raise my hands a little bit or whatever is because that enemy, that same thing that is messing with Saul, is trying to mess with you and say your God's not worth it. You might be embarrassed by somebody here who really doesn't matter. The thought process, do people matter? Let me be really clear on that. So, forward a few more years. David became king at 30 years old. All of this stuff, all of this wrecking people he did was between 15 and 25, 27 years old. He became 30, he became king, and then he continued to go to war. Like, this was a young man. The wisdom was probably not in the frontal cortex yet. He's, of course, going to God saying, what should I do? Because right now I don't even know. But it fascinates me how God just shows him and directs him and is with him constantly, loving on him and directing him and giving him insane success. So now David is king. It's a little bit calmed down. He has several wives and a whole bunch of kids. And as David begins to age, his kids are like, well, I want to be king now. And so his kid betrays him and then gets a whole group of to come against the king and try to take over the kingdom and have a coup and run David out of town. Absolute betrayal by his son, who he loves, who he gave life, who he has invested in and taught everything, brought into knowledge and relationship with all these other guys that are now against him. Betrayal, deep, hardcore betrayal. And he goes to his God and he starts worshiping. He expresses his heart, the depth of what he's feeling and dealing with, and he just goes to worship God and tell God all about it. His friend and his dad, his papa. All of the worship songs that I know and that I have typically sung are up and happy and praising and God, you're so good. And not that David isn't saying that God is good, but he's also lamenting, and it's deep. Like, I've been betrayed before, and it's not fun. It doesn't feel good, especially when it's people that you really love and trust. So David worships, and then all of these old guys that have fought with him over the years are like legendary. And they come up, gray hairs and all, and they fight for David, with David, and reestablish his kingdom. And then David gives praise again. God, you're so good. You said I would be king, and you have kept me in that place, even against my own flesh and blood. God, you're amazing. And then he laments for his kid, right? And he worships for that. A little bit earlier, backing up, sorry, I skipped over this. But David goes through this really dark time where he's not where he's supposed to be. He begins to lust after a woman that he sees bathing on a rooftop. He goes and he has his way with her, and then gets her pregnant and starts to panic. And so he starts lying to people about this. And then he brings her husband home from war, where David should be leading his guys. He brings her husband home, and then he tries to get him to be with his wife, but this guy is so loyal and so faithful to his group, the people that he's commanding, that he won't even go home. Why could I be at home with my family when all of my guys aren't? Like, this dude is awesome. And so eventually David sends him back to the front, and then he commands the army to step back away from him and let him be killed so that David doesn't get into trouble. Now, that's pretty dark. That's pretty ruthless. Now, David's a warrior, so it's not like fully beyond him, but up until this point, he has been honorable and forthcoming and all about his guys, his men. But then he takes this awesome sin on, and then he starts getting hit with those thoughts. Cover it up. Don't let it come out. Hide it. You got to make this right. He's the king. He can do whatever he wants. But before God, he knows it's wrong, and so he's dealing with guilt, and rather than going right to God, he tries to solve it himself. So he has her husband killed and then takes her as his wife. Right then, the man of God, who is a prophet, who hears from God, comes to David and said, "You did this. I know that you did this. You got to come clean." And David breaks immediately. "Yes, I know." And he begins to worship his God in the middle of that darkness, right in the middle of that sin. He confesses everything, and he begins to just lament through this, still going to God, not running away. Okay, ownership. Then this woman that he was with is pregnant, now his wife, and she has a stillborn. The baby dies. Huge grief. He takes that on, and he is now praising his God. "You're good. You're great." And it's really interesting. All of these that I'm saying, when I'm pausing and saying that David praised his God, they're all written throughout the Psalms. This one is really interesting because David is saying, "God, you're good. It's my fault. I sinned against you, but whatever." I'm not saying that stillborn is anyone's fault, but David takes it on as his sin, and then he confesses it, and then he laments and grieves about it, and then he begins to praise his God again. Over and over. No matter what the situation is, David always goes right back to the praise, right back to the worship. Because whatever we're going through, our God is right there with us in the middle of it. Even if we do something like adultery and then kill the woman's husband and then try to cover it up, God is still right there in the middle of that with you. Whatever that sin is, whatever that thing that you're dealing with, he's right there with you. In the middle of the betrayal, in the middle of the awful things that have happened all throughout David's life. Like, why there is so much about David in the Bible blows my mind. He's not a good dude. But he loved his God consistently throughout all of it. So later in David's life, he begins to set his son up who's supposed to take the throne. And he wants to create an amazing temple for the Lord. God said, "You can't do that. You've got blood on your hands, but I'll do that through your son." So he sets it up, and his son begins to build the temple. And as they finish the foundation, David stops everything, has the entire nation come, and they begin to worship God and celebrate. Whew. We're loving on our God now. This is all about you. You have said from the beginning that I want to be your God and I want you to be my people. And now we're established and able to do that. And they begin to move forward in that. And David worships, celebrating what God has done. Man, that feels like a harsh transition from the baby story to that one. But I'm trying to get it all in the amount of time that I have. It is amazing how God wants us to be with him and him to be with us throughout every situation in our life. That was a lightning fast story of David. Are you with me so far? Okay. So what I was hearing this morning and what or over the last week as I'm preparing is worship is not a Sunday morning thing. Worship is a lifestyle. Whether you're praising your God, whether you're lamenting because something massive has happened, whether you've got to make decisions. Like there are Psalms where David is in the middle of the desert being pursued by the guy he swore that he would protect and be with and honor. And he's saying, God, I don't know what to do. All these guys are coming after me, and I didn't do anything wrong. It's completely unjust. And I know that you're good. I know that you're in this. You have given me promises that I haven't seen yet come to fruition, but I know you're in it. So I'm going to stay the course. I'm going to own who I am, where I am, and what I'm going through until I see the promise fulfilled. And God came through every time. Even when David went really dark, God, I know that you're in this with me. I am not making good decisions, but I know that you're in this with me. Help me get through it. God, I've been betrayed by people that I loved, but I know that you're with me in this, and I know that you're going to get me through it. It's a very common story, but this one story of David has almost every element that we've ever gone through in our lives, times 10. And it is just, why? Why would he do this? He's an 8th son, and God elevates him and loves on him. So your view of your significance, completely irrelevant. Because God says, you're the man, or you're the woman, and I love you deeply and dearly, and I am all about you. Let's develop a relationship. Let's worship. Let's sing together. Tell me all your stuff. I want to know it. Nothing is too insignificant because you're significant. Everything is. So what you're going through, what you're dealing with, where your heart is, bring it right back to God. Worship and praise, you're praising God in the celebrations. You're saying, God, thank you for this. I love that you do this. I love the way that you came through, that you fulfilled promises. Worship is really kind of a silly word to me because it encompasses so much. It's like the word love. There's like 50,000 different types of loves, but we have one word. Worship. There are so many different types of worship. Worship could be you're lamenting. It could be that you're telling God, hey, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. God, I've just dealt with this. God, I've got no friends. I'm lonely. David sang about that all the time. He's out in the desert all by himself until all these ruffians and weird people started hanging out with him. I don't know if you've been in the desert or out in the wilderness. Not normal people live there. He had 600 of them, and they followed him all the time. And he's going, God, this is not what you've called me to. This is not who you've called me to be, but I know you're taking me somewhere. So I invite you into this situation. 8th son, out with the sheep, fighting bears and lions. Oh, God, you got to be with me. Because I'm not running up and grabbing their whiskers and beating them with a club unless you're here. Right? Man, that is so weird. That is so weird. But whatever your situation is, whatever you're going through, right back to God. Jesus loved us so much that he left heaven, said, I gotta be with my people. They're messed up. They're literally dying because they don't know what to do. They have taken my relationship and turned it into a religion and are following rules, and this is going the opposite direction of what I've set up. He goes, I love them so much, I've got to get them back on track. And he showed up and he took all of our sin on himself, died on the cross so that we could be back in relationship with him. With David, he created a system of restitution that through his darkness and sin, he would be remembered throughout all of eternity. It makes no sense because you look from a purely religious point. In the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira were two people, and they were part of the church. All they did was say they didn't bring all of the tithe into the church, and they died. Right now, I mean, that was it. David David committed murder so that he could marry this woman, and adultery. And God said, that's a man after my heart. It's about the relationship. You can do all the right things and say all the right things, and that one tiny little sin is still sin. But you have a relationship with God, and suddenly there is grace and forgiveness and welcoming. All you got to do is just ask for forgiveness. God, where are you in this? I don't know what's going on. Bizarre. Absolutely crazy, right? I'm overwhelming a point here, but so where are you? What is the point that you're at in your life right now? Are you highly successful and everything is going wonderful and COVID is irrelevant and things are great and wonderful? Then we bring praise to God. Are you on your deathbed and you can't figure out what's up or what's right? Bring worship to God. Love on him, and he will love you right back, and he will bring you through it. So worship brings us close to God and intensifies the relationship. Worship recognizes God's intervention, participation, and interaction in our lives. Worship, like I said, is a celebration. Worship changes the atmosphere. Saul, you got weird stuff going on in your house? Turn on worship and leave it on. You don't like the way things feel in a situation or in a place, in your own head? Turn on worship. I'm saying whatever you like to listen to, Bethel, Gaither Band, I don't care. As long as they're worshiping God, turn it on and your atmosphere will begin to change. And as you begin to worship, that much faster. Worship brings breakthrough. I think Pastor was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Paul and Silas were in prison, and they began to worship, and it literally broke them out of prison. That's New Testament. That's today. It happens. David is worshiping, and all of his situation, all of his surrounding began to change. Worship brings recognition of our situation, emotion, and reminds us of who we are and whose we are. Worship reminds us of promises and who God is. So where are you? What are you going through? What have you come through? And where do you need God to show up? We have worship team, if you guys want to come back up. We have almost every Sunday, our prayer team meets over here, and they will pray for you, whatever you're going through. There is nothing too big or too small that they're not willing to take time and pray for you, that God is always listening. And there's nothing that is too big or too small that you are going through that you can't take directly to God. He just loves you. He is all about you. Your situations, the stuff that you're dealing with, is hugely significant to you, but also to your God. So if you're ashamed, especially if you're ashamed or you're feeling guilt, that's that demonic stuff that is trying to get you not to get back with God. It's trying to drive that wedge between you. So you tell it to shut up and go to hell, and you go right back to God. Worship him, love on him. So guys, think about where you are, what you're dealing with. Let's sing some more. Let's worship our God. Get in a position or stance that is comfortable for you, and then step up one more to a little bit less comfortable, less dignified, and let's worship our God together.